What's a work-related accident that still haunts you to this day? While building Levi Stadium, a trucker was unloading rebar when the entire pile fell on him, impaling him multiple times and also crushing him. I never met the man, but his cat and elderly dog ended up at a local shelter. We planned to adopt the dog and ended up taking home the cat too because we didn't want to split them. Nana, the dog, passed away in her sleep in 2017, about 2 years after we brought her home. Seal, the cat, is around 7 years old now and doing just fine. I've always wondered if they ever thought of him. Worked for Edie's Ice Cream. My truck was loaded wrong, so at a stop had to shimmy between pallets to get to the back pallet. I was unloading the top pallet and the pallet below collapsed. The top pallet slid onto me. But since I was between two waist-high pallets, about 1,200 pounds of ice cream bent me at the waist the wrong way. Sort of like bending over normally, backwards. Ended up with 2 broken vertebrae, nerve damage, and it wasn't fun. Eventually got a 6-disc fusion and was able to walk again. But now I have arthritis in my back and it really hurts most of the time. I also have numb areas in my right thigh and my whole lower back. Would not recommend. Engineer decided to open a parcel with a Stanley knife, not sure if he slipped or what angle he was cutting at, but bam! Stanley knife in the eye. Never saw him again, but the Health and Safety Department quickly introduced a policy that safety goggles needed to be worn when opening boxes. I used to be a wedding caterer. While the bride and groom were going to cut the cake, it started to fall off the table. As they were both trying to catch this ridiculously huge thing, the bride slipped and fell into a pyramid of wine glasses on a fold-out table behind her. The table collapsed and a wine glass stem pierced her neck. She survived, but she was not going to be able to take that gown back to the rental place. I've never seen so much blood in my life. I don't think you can call this an accident, but I was working with this guy and out of nowhere he says, "I'm sick of working here, check this out." He then jammed his foot into the gears on the machine. Completely mangled his foot. Saw him 20 years later and his foot was still messed up. He was looking for a couple weeks of workers' comp but got a lifetime disability instead. It was pretty horrific. I worked in a dealership and once a technician was using a tool that broke free, bashing him in the face and knocking out multiple teeth, splitting his lip and breaking his nose. It was a bloody mess. Young kid with balls of steel apparently. While waiting for an ambulance he was sitting there talking and smiled to show the damage. That smile was horrifying. He recovered and got a ton of dental work and still works there. I was a cashier in a grocery store. One of my fellow cashiers was a senior, just killing time in retirement. One day, she had a dizzy spell and collapsed. She cracked her head open on the floor. Paramedics were called, and as they were loading her into the ambulance, she was crying out that she could still finish her shift. A coworker who was fresh out of trade school was using a table saw to cut 1 thick sheets of plastic into strips. It was cold, so he put on some leather work gloves. A glove got caught and pulled his hand into the saw, nearly severing his right index and middle fingers. He came to me and said, I think I cut my hand. It literally looked like a package of pork ribs, all mangled bone and tissue. They were able to save the fingers, but they're non-functional and don't bend. We almost killed a customer at the restaurant I worked at. He had a milk allergy that we didn't know about, so we made his food on the same grill as everything else. Apparently his allergy was severe enough that he spent the weekend in the hospital because of anaphylaxis from cross-contamination. He was super nice about it and acknowledged that he really should have told us. He remained a regular for the 2+ years that I continued working there, and our systems changed drastically to accommodate allergies. At the cookie factory where my brother worked, a worker died when someone accidentally dumped out a massive mixer full of molasses on top of him. He suffocated before they could dig him out. I used to work at Sonic when I was 15. I was on break and sat on the patio. I was looking at the road as this super nice car pulled into the drive-thru. As the car turned, a motorcyclist flew right into the side of him. He flew about 10 feet in the air before landing right on his leg. He slid about 8 feet before hitting the curb. His leg snapped into 2 pieces and his leg was basically degloved. I sat in shock before people started screaming to call the police. I ran inside and told my bosses. 3 of them ran out while the other workers started shutting down the store for the ambulances and police. I was the only one who saw what happened. His face was skinned, leg was degloved. His fingers went in all directions. But it wasn't the sight that scared me. It was the wheezing noise that he made as he slowly started gaining consciousness. He was mouthing the words "help me." But his lips were gone. He could only make noise. I didn't work that day, and cried the whole time he was being put in the ambulance. The worst part was, the car who hit him drove off without staying a second. The owner of the car was eventually found, but nobody was charged. A few months later the victim of the hit and run came to Sonic. He lost his leg and was still in the process of recovery. The guy came to thank us and let us know how he was doing. Glad to see he survived, but still traumatizing nonetheless. I think it was the day before Thanksgiving 2012. There was a news story about a guy trying to reach something off of a platform at a local paper mill. He fell into a nearly boiling hot tank of caustic solution with spinning blades in it. There was absolutely nothing left. I have worked over those exact tanks numerous times. It's an old facility, but if you don't follow their safety policies right down to the T, they will throw you out in a heartbeat. That's just a terrible way to go on one of the worst days that it could happen of the year. I think about it often. Worked at an industrial setting and had a contractor come in and use a hydraulic ram to pull a bearing about the size of your head. They didn't hook up the lines correctly and 40,000 pounds per square inch of fluid hit him in the neck and almost decapitated him. It took out part of his brain stem. I got there for the death rattle. Blood everywhere, we couldn't help him. He was in his early 20s and his wife just gave birth a few months prior. Not really haunted, but we had a guy in the army violate one of the cardinal rules of working in the motor pool: remove your watches, rings and dog tags. He had kept his wedding ring on and was working in the turret of an Avenger. When he climbed down the tiny ladder at the back, he decided to jump down the last few feet to the ground. His ring caught on the ladder and degloved his finger. He held up his hand and just looked at it and said, "Oh F." We grabbed him, wrapped his hand, not much blood honestly, and took him to the hospital. All the while another soldier was carrying the fleshy remnants in his hands and dry heaving. Once he was taken in at the hospital, they just removed the finger. He became a cautionary tale for all my future soldiers. My first job as an auto electrician at a car garage in 2000. Walking through the workshop and one of the mechanics drops to the floor screaming as I'm maybe 20 feet or so away. His right arm had smoke around it and he was trying to get his overalls off whilst yelling for help. Turns out as he was using the gas bottles, oxyacetylene, to cut off an exhaust that was giving him trouble, some of the molten metal that dropped off fell inside the overall through the right arm and burnt straight into the underside of his forearm. I remember the smell was like meat burning with a sweet side to it. As he's trying to get the overalls off, the material has fused to this bubbling like gooey hole on his arm, and when he tried to get them off it must have caused him even more pain. He was writhing around, which made it very hard for us to try and help. It unfortunately got much worse though. I don't know the names of what was damaged, but he couldn't work as a mechanic anymore because this molten stuff had burned deep into his forearm and it stopped him being able to move some of his fingers. I don't know how things went for him after this, as he never came back to work for us after being in the hospital for a while. Worked at a factory that dealt with sprinkler systems. Watched a man using a plasma cutter on a 12-inch pipe while his tinted glasses were on top of his head. A flash from the plasma cutter melted his contact to his eyeball. In an impulsive panic, I watched him try to pull out the contact lens that brought his cornea along with it. Loudest I'd ever heard a grown man scream. Happened 14 years ago and it still gets me. When the concrete laborer was cleaning the concrete paving machine and the operator was in his car staying warm and the laborer's rain gear strap got caught in the auger and dragged him in. Most blood-curdling screams I've heard as he was taking his last breath, and it made mincemeat of him. So sad everyone was looking for the emergency off button, but if only the operator was where he should have been. I was a banquet server. Getting my pocket hooked to the knob on the door and ripping my pants almost clean off as I walked out into the banquet hall full of people. I used to work at a sandwich place that made hot and cold food. There was a coworker who always came in stoned. One time, they came in too stoned, dropped the tongs into the deep fryer, and tried to pick them back up. When I was in my early 20s working for an electrical contractor specializing in server rooms, another apprentice and I were tasked with running conduit for power and data into the new server room from a set of panels like 150 feet away. He was bending the pipe and I was standing in the suspended ceiling, on a ladder of course, hanging it on threaded rod hangers that I had already shot into the deck above. Unfortunately for me, the lighting in this area was ancient 2x4s that had those Bakelite plug-in connectors. The problem with Bakelite is that it becomes very brittle with age, and after a long time it will basically disintegrate into tiny crumbs and dust if it gets whacked. As my buddy was handing me a stick of 2 inches EMT, I lost my grip and the end of the pipe whacked into the top of one of the lights, causing the Bakelite connector to crumble, and the end of the EMT nicked the 277 volt line feeding the light. These were 20 amp 277 volt commercial lighting circuits. A huge fireball came out of the top of the light, rolling over everything in the ceiling for like 8 feet in every direction, including me of course. I immediately covered my face, knocking myself off the ladder, and fell through the ceiling almost cartoon style. It was awful. I took down a 30 section of ceiling. The lights thankfully were held up with separate wire ties to the deck, not just clipped onto the grid, so thankfully they didn't fall down on top of me. Thanks to the OSHA inspectors who were on staff at the client, I was wearing gloves, safety glasses, and a hard hat. Otherwise I may have gotten really messed up. In the end I burned off a chunk of my beard and singed my eyebrows, and I got banged up from the fall, but that could very well have been a fatal incident.